I would bet there's a high statistical likelihood that the 6 to 7 hour a night sleeper would be inferior on tasks that required short-term memory and fine motor coordination. I know if you're someone who's like, hey, Brett, I want to sleep, I'm just having problems sleeping. I'm going to get to what we can do for that, but I just want everyone to understand really what is happening. If you're someone who wants to have lean muscle, if you're someone who wants to have energy, you're someone who wants to decrease fat, sleep is like steroids, folks. Be 6 years old after 9 o'clock at night. Be 6 after 9. So how are you feeling today? Now, the odds are the answer to that question has a lot to do with how you slept last night or maybe the night before, or maybe even this week. Sleep is so important, not only for our long-term health, but how we perform on a day-to-day basis. I swear, in a relationship or marriage, it becomes mostly just waking up, reporting how you slept and how you hope to sleep the next night, because it impacts your moods, your function, and everything during that day. Now, sleep is kind of strange because we've learned more about the function of sleep and the importance of sleep in the last 20 years than we have known for the last thousands of years. Because sleep is kind of funny biologically. You got to figure back in the day when humans really weren't at the top of the food chain, sleep didn't make a whole lot of sense. It's not like we had a lot of natural defenses. We had fingernails. That's what we had. But we had our brains. But those brains needed a rest, so we would fall asleep during the nighttime. Well, guess what's roaming around during the nighttime? Yeah, predators. So biologically and evolutionarily, sleep didn't make a whole lot of sense. And that's why it's been so confusing for researchers, because they know what happens while we sleep, but they don't really know why we have to sleep, because if we don't sleep, we will die. And they have observed people who have died from lack of sleep. So they know that. So that's why we just haven't learned that much about sleep until we've had some technological advances recently. But we now know that sleep is one of the pillars next to diet and exercise that's critical for allowing our bodies and brains to not only survive, but thrive. So today I want to address 3 different sleep archetypes. And I'm going to hopefully talk to all of you out there, because after working with thousands of people, there's 3 different archetypes when it comes to people's attitude towards sleep. The first archetype, if you're sitting there rolling your eyes saying, oh my God, here we go, more hippie talk about how much I'm supposed to sleep. You're just sick of hearing about all this sleep talk. You're like, hey, listen, I sleep 4 hours a night. My family sleeps 4 hours a night. Might have died before the age of 60, but you might say, I'm grinding, man. I'm grind culture, grind or die. I don't need that sleep. I want to talk to you because I understand your passion, your drive, but I think it's also important to understand what we now understand about the importance of sleep. Now, the second sleep archetype, and I fit into all of these at some point in my life, is maybe you've heard about the importance of sleep. Maybe you probably like more sleep, but you also like watching Netflix. Maybe it's video games. Maybe you get caught up in emails, but you're making decisions that interfere with your ability to get a quantity and quality of sleep that's going to actually allow you to feel and perform the way you want to. So you kind of know sleep's important. You're interested, but you kind of have some habits that prevent it. And then the third archetype, and this is a majority of the clients I work with. I know it's a majority of you out there. You're like, hey, I want to sleep. I really want to. I give myself the time to sleep. I go to bed at a reasonable hour. I do all the stuff, and I still can't fall asleep. Or maybe you fall asleep and you wake up. I fall into all of those categories, particularly that third one. I want to sleep. Sometimes it's hard to get to sleep at a rough day. Sometimes I wake up at 2 a.m. and I'm solving the world's problems. So I want to talk about all 3 of those archetypes and how each one of you, how everyone listening to this today can come up with some strategies. And I want to give you some tools so that you're never going to have perfect sleep. There's going to be bad nights of sleep, but some things you can do to improve your sleep based on the research and not just what I've read or heard, but what I've actually applied with my clients. So for that first archetype, if you haven't heard these stats involved with the importance of sleep, I don't want to belabor this the entire episode because I think there's too much of a focus on what happens if you don't sleep now and it's scare tactics. But most people are saying, no, I want to sleep. But if you don't think it's important, I just want to read off some things as to why I'm here today talking about it. So To begin, what's considered sleep disruption is sleeping less than 5 hours a night on average. If you're getting more than 5 hours, that's better than nothing. Between 5 and 6 hours on average a night, though, you're still going to be impaired. You're still seeing a statistically advanced likelihood that you're going to suffer from one of these things. Optimal sleep, if you want to cut out most of the risk involved with sleep, the goal is to get more than 6 hours a night, particularly 7 is the good basement. But with between 6 and 7, we're not as at great at risk as all these. So if you're sleeping less than 5 hours a night, here's what we can look forward to. Heart disease, a 200 to 300% increase in artery calcification. Now, artery calcification is involved with blocked arteries, involved in heart attacks, ischemia, all these things that can happen with our hearts that cause to early death, but also compromise our quality of living while we're alive. 2 times the risk of having a major cardiac event, 2 times more likely to have a heart attack if you're staying up till 12 or 1 in the morning and having to get up at 5 or 6 in the morning. 15 to 30% higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Just one night, and we'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about hormones, but just one night of sleeping less than 5 hours, your ability to manage blood sugar is significantly decreased the next day. Think about what that does when you get a bunch of those back to back. A 15 to 50% increased likelihood of obesity. And again, that's through a multiple of factors. For one, you're just freaking tired, so you don't want to get up and exercise. But we can also, when we don't sleep adequately, it starts messing with our hormonal regulation system that tells us when we're hungry and when we're full. Your brain's emotional center. So I want you leaders or parents or anyone who's in charge of others to listen to this. So our emotional centers are 60% more reactive when we're sleep deprived. Again, that's 5 or less hours a night. So what does that do? Think about what that does to your ability to make decisions. Think about what that does to interpersonal communication. Think about what that does to anxiety levels. So you can see that it's significant. 30 to 50% higher risk of ED. Listen to this, men. 30 to 50% increased risk of erectile dysfunction. No good. No thank you. That's what happens with that lack of sleep. 10 to 25% drop in daytime testosterone, fellas. I know that's a big talk right now. I'm going to have some experts on talking about TRT in the future. But if your testosterone is lower than you or your physician or whoever you're working with would like, odds are your sleep patterns have a lot to do with that. And then finally, overall mortality, again, your likelihood of early death increases by about 15%. Now, for me, if I'm doing something that creates a 15% increased likelihood that I won't be with my family or my friends or my community as much, I'm interested. But if 15% doesn't sound like that much to you, let me share something with you. So I was a subject matter expert on a panel for GE Health. This was a couple years ago, because they're looking at decreasing their healthcare costs throughout the organization. And so they wanted to bring in experts to say, hey, here's what we could do with employees. Here's the data, all these different things. And I was talking about movement and exercise, and there was a Princeton sleep researcher that came in to share her research and data on essentially on sleep, the quality of sleep, quantity of sleep, what they've discovered. And she was sharing that, yes, it appears to be a 15% increase in mortality when we're sleeping less than 5 hours a night. However, they found that when you put in all the comorbidities and other factors that sleep impacts, so workplace hazards, car accidents, mental health episodes, different things like that, she said it's closer to a 50% increase in mortality. So when you're sleeping less than 5 hours a night, there's a 50% chance you're going to die young. 50% gets my attention. I hope it gets your attention if you're somebody that's saying, I'll sleep when I'm dead, because it's going to come. Odds are, statistical likelihood, it's going to come sooner than you think. But you might also say, well, you know what, Brett? We all die, right? I hear that all, and anyone who's had the conversation about health with someone who really doesn't embrace health, they say, you know what, we're all going to die. And that's very true. You could do everything perfectly, and we're all going to die. Even that guy that is out there thinking that he's doing everything perfect and he's got the, don't die thing. Yeah, he's going to die too. But here's the thing. It's not so much about worrying about that we're going to die someday. It's being able to enjoy living. And you see a lot of these statistics when it comes to calcification of the heart and increased likelihood of depression and obesity and diabetes. These aren't so much something that are just directly causing death. They're causing suffering. And when we do things to ourselves that increase our suffering before we die, that's something that we consciously have to deal with. And that's something that is going to be very disparately different from someone who does take reasonable care of themselves and someone who doesn't. So just remember that it's not so much the fear of death. A lot of these are aligned with actually suffering. Now, there is one, I do want to address this because I get this challenge, this pushback every time I bring this up. There's people that say, well, yeah, I heard there's a gene where you don't really have to sleep as much. And I think I have that gene. They have discovered there's a gene mutation that people with this gene mutation can sleep 3-4 hours a night and it does not impact their health. They might not feel great the next day, but it just doesn't have these negative impacts on their health. However, the percentage of people they estimate have this gene mutation is far less than 1%. One researcher called it, there's lottery-like odds that you have this gene. So if you've been going on 4 or 5 hours of sleep for a long time and you're surviving, odds are, if we were to take you to your physician or we were to take you to a lab to test your motor reaction time, your memory, your learning retention, things like that, they would be severely impaired, even though you've learned to feel okay with the lack of sleep. So just know that these numbers aren't for just a few people. These are for 99.99999% of people. The data I just shared is very relevant. All right, so maybe that got your attention. If you're someone that says, oh, this sleep stuff is hippie stuff, I'm hoping that got your attention a little bit. So next I want to talk about, well, what is sleep? What do we know sleep is? Because it's kind of funny. There's still a lot that we don't know because there's things about sleep that don't make sense. For example, it's easy to think of sleep as something where we just essentially our brain says, shut out the lights. We go unconscious. We wake up 5, 6, 7, 8 hours later. Sleep is actually a very active time for our brains. Not so much our body, but our brains. A lot's going on. It's like our body and brain brings in a night janitorial crew that comes and does some really critical things for our brains and bodies. Now, this janitorial crew actually works in cycles, in rhythms, in phases throughout the night. Depending on the reason, they used to say that we had 4 sleep phases. Now most researchers are saying it's more distinctive 3 sleep phases. But when you close your eyes, you go through these sleep phases and different things happen in these 3 to 4 sleep phases. A quality night of sleep, and a quality night of sleep where you truly are recovered, where this janitorial crew in your brain and body has the time they need to do what they need to do, we go through these sleep phases about 3 to 5 times in a night. So let's talk about these sleep phases so we understand what happens in each. Now, there's phase 1 and phase 2 sleep. Some researchers say they're a little different. Some say, they're similar enough to kind of group them together. Either way, very light sleep. This is kind of when you're taking a nap during the daytime. You fall asleep on a plane. I remember, I'd nod off in class. That's kind of that phase 1, phase 2. Your heart rate does slow down, breathing slows down, brain waves start to slow down. If you wake up, you're a little disoriented. You're kind of like, oh my gosh, what happened? But not a lot happens from a recovery standpoint. Now, if I get through that phase 1 and phase 2 sleep and I get into that phase 3 sleep, now we're in non-REM, rapid eye movement, non-rapid eye movement deep sleep. I'll talk about what rapid eye movement sleep is in just a second. But non-REM deep sleep is deep sleep. This is where stuff starts to happen. We start to release growth hormone that helps us recover. This is where we start to consolidate memories. This is where all the recovery happens to tissues. This is where all of that really starts to happen. And a healthy sleeper will spend quite a bit of time in an evening in this non-REM deep sleep, phase 3. So phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 makes sense to researchers because obviously we're going to sleep. So they say, okay, well, they're going into a resting phase. They can look at our heart rates. Researchers can look at our brain waves, our body temperature. Everything seems to make sense for rest. Going down, breathing rate is stabilizing, heart rate is decreasing, brain waves are slowing. But then we get to this stage, like 3 or 4, however you want to count it, our deep sleep, REM, rapid eye movement. Now, here's where things get crazy. So researchers will tell you that during REM sleep, this deep, deep level of sleep, if you look at brain waves, brain activity of someone who's in REM sleep, and you look at brain activity of someone who's awake, an experienced researcher wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two. That's wild. And this is what baffles researchers. They're like, wait a minute, this is supposed to be your most restful time, yet your brain is firing as if it's awake. Now, in REM sleep, this is where we are consolidating memories. This is where our brain's figuring out and making sense and organizing our emotional experiences of the day. This is where a lot of things go down that are critical for our mental health and our physical health. We tend to, even though we go through these cycles, we'll go light sleep, a little bit deeper sleep, deepest sleep, and then we'll bounce out into light sleep. Those are the cycles. We spend more time in that REM sleep a little bit later into the night / earlier in the morning. And REM sleep, we don't spend a majority of our evening in that. This is like we just bounce into this super deep sleep to really consolidate everything. But what doesn't make sense is our bodies and brains, or our brains at least, appear to be fired up, which is a little bit crazy, and it keeps researchers kind of on a wild goose chase, and they're a little bit confused about it. All right, so in order to go through those 3 to 5 times, you probably heard, well, you should sleep 7 to 9 hours a night. That's not just a rule they came up with so that they can, ticket you if you find out or you're in trouble or you're bad if you don't hit that 7 to 9. It just means that the average person, it takes about, to get through those sleep cycles, a functional amount of times, it takes about 7 to 9 hours for most people to do that. So I talked about the nighttime janitorial crew there for a second. I want you to think like you're hiring, maybe you're in your office right now, your home, whatever it is, you're hiring a crew that comes in at 10 o'clock at night. And in the contract, they said, hey, we need about 7 to 8 hours to clean all this stuff up. You say, okay, you sign the contract. Well, they come in, they're cleaning. At hour 5, you come in and say, hey, you guys got to get out. We're turning up the operation. I'm going to get the day started. They're like, well, we couldn't clean everything. You're like, well, too bad. Get to it tomorrow night. So they come back tomorrow night. Well, what do they got to do? They got to take care of all the stuff they didn't get the night before, but then move on to the next thing. So now they're behind. So they're trying more. They're trying to get the junk out, trying to clean all that stuff out. Again, 5 hours. They're like, listen, we need 7 to 8. You're like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give it to you. Think about what your house or your office would look like if that was the case. Well, research has shown that, and I'll tell you the mechanism. We'll discuss the mechanism behind it in a little bit, but researchers have said, yeah, that's really how it works with your brain too. Your brain has this cleansing process that happens during sleep. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So that's where that 7 to 9 hours comes from. And I challenged a sleep researcher once on this because my entire life I've been like a 6 to 7 hour a night sleeper. So remember, as long as you're getting more than 6, you're mitigating most of the risks. However, I challenged the researcher with that. I said, you can look at my blood work, my brain appears to be working fine. I feel great. I'm energized, all these different things. And she said, well, if we took you into the lab, if we took someone who averages 6 to 7 hours a night, compared to someone who sleeps more than 7 on average, she said, I would bet there's a high statistical likelihood that the 6 to 7 hour a night sleeper would be inferior on tasks that required short-term memory and fine motor coordination. Now, she said, this is not necessarily like a health scare, but if performance is of interest to you, those are two things that made me think about it. I'm closer to a 7 hour a night person, but just if you're someone that fits in that middle, that's important to know. So now that we know, okay, sleep is important, obviously. If we don't sleep, we know the bad stuff that happens. What happens during sleep is these cycles. Let's talk about what happens during these cycles. So maybe you can understand why when you wake up with 4 hours of sleep, you're not really feeling great. So the first thing, I would argue probably one of the most important things, because I can tell you that nearly every single one of my friends' fathers, and this is profound, including myself, their fathers have developed dementia. Nearly every single one of my friends' fathers. My dad had dementia. My grandfather had dementia. I just had a friend's father pass dementia. So it's becoming, as our population ages, it's becoming almost an epidemic. Alzheimer's and dementia. And one of the proposed, what they link it to is they talk about, the buildup of amyloid plaques in the brain, and the brain essentially has these obstructions. All these things happen at the brain level. Well, they proposed, the Greeks, a physician, Galen, proposed, he noticed these pressure differentials within the arterial walls and within the brain after people went to sleep. And the brain doesn't really have a lymph system. So the brain creates byproducts, but doesn't really have a organ or something that drains or cleans or detoxifies. So he proposed, he noticed these pressure differentials, and he said, well, hey, it looks like when people sleep, it creates sort of this flushing of the brain into the cerebral spinal fluid, which is our spinal fluid. I said, yeah, that's what it looks like. And that's really what they embraced as the notion. Well, over the years, they thought, that's not what it is. I mean, those crazy Greeks, what do they have? They don't have technology. They just have brains and theories. Fast forward thousands of years, and now they've realized that's exactly what happens when we sleep. We create, there's this pressure differential. We create this flushing of the folds between our brain. It helps remove amyloid plaques. It helps remove byproducts of our brain working. They go into the cerebral spinal fluid, out in our bloodstream, and eventually we excrete them. So now we know that that's a really important function of sleep. When you're not sleeping, whether it be due to behavior, beliefs, or sleep apnea, or anxiety, whatever it is, if that continues for a long time, it starts to dramatically negatively impact our brain, build up of amyloid plaques and other byproducts within our brain, which is not good. So that's, I think, one of the most important things that we can look at for the importance of sleep, because that's something that happens. Now, let's talk about hormones. So when we go to sleep, it's a time where we're not constantly reacting to environmental stimulus. So our body and brain is kind of like, we can reduce the noise and we can just focus on what needs to be done. It's quiet. It's the same reason I get up to work in the morning, because I'm not going to be bothered. Our brains and bodies like that at nighttime. So they're going through hormonally. This is where during sleep, we release about 80% of the growth hormone that we're going to release. That's a lot. So if you're someone who wants to have lean muscle, if you're someone who wants to have energy, or someone who wants to decrease fat, sleep is like steroids, folks. Getting sleep is going to be getting adequate sleep is going to be something that actually helps you burn fat because of that release of growth hormone. And when you don't sleep, we don't release the growth hormone. We're unable to recover tissues as well. We're unable to build lean muscle mass. We're unable to burn fat. So that release of growth hormone is important. Now, we also, hunger. Our hunger is regulated by two hormones, leptin and ghrelin. Now, leptin, after we eat, leptin raises and says, hey, you're full. Well, when our blood sugar gets low and we've already digested, ghrelin levels raise and say, hey, you're hungry. When you don't sleep, when your sleep is impaired, ghrelin levels stay high. So you probably had a bad night of sleep, or maybe a little hungover or something like that. That's why it's just, not only are you hungry, but it's the stuff you're hungry for, right? It's like here in California, we have California burritos. They're burritos with French fries in them. They're super good, but not good for you. But donuts and all that junk we eat is because our brain is telling us, sending us a false signal that we are hungry, so we eat more. And that's, I talked about that link between lack of sleep and obesity. That's a big player in that they think. All right, so that leptin and ghrelin. Now, insulin sensitivity. When we fall asleep, when we're asleep, insulin sensitivity improves, which means that we're better at getting blood sugar out of our blood, storing it, and managing blood sugar in an effective way. When we don't sleep, our blood sugar regulation, our insulin sensitivity is impaired. So if you're someone who is kind of worried, maybe you have type 2 diabetes in your family, maybe you went to the doctor last time and they're starting to get concerned about your management of your glucose. Getting quality sleep is something that's going to help manage that. And again, I know if you're someone who's like, hey, Brett, I want to sleep, I'm just having problems sleeping. I'm going to get to what we can do for that. But I just want everyone to understand really what is happening. What is this janitorial crew that's running around your brain and body? What are they doing during the nighttime? Now, cognitively, in your brain, when you sleep, you're organizing thoughts. So during the day, think about how many thoughts you have during the day that's rushing through there and things happen and you have perspectives. Well, it looks like the areas of our brain that help organize those and make sense of those and use those thoughts to actually inform future behavior, the evening is where we organize those different thoughts. It's also where we consolidate memories. And this is when we get to that phase 3 and 4 sleep, is we start to actually, if we learn something, it kind of floats around, and then when we sleep, it actually solidifies. And it's crazy. I think back to college, and we can all think back to probably some time in our academic career when we stayed up all night for a test and we went in, just hoped it was fresh. I've seen research as to where they've said that a night without sleep decreases memory capacity by up to 80%. I've seen that number. So we stayed up all night and actually decreased our ability to remember, which obviously becomes a problem. Now, one of the important things too with sleep is emotional processing. So it looks like when we sleep, our limbic system, our emotional system, it takes these emotions that are fired at us, allostatic loads from stress, and maybe it's joy, or maybe it's sorrow or grief, or all these different emotions. And emotions are complex. And when it stores those when we sleep, and that's one of the theories behind why our dreams are so wild, because we're trying to say, okay, this emotion happened. What was that about? How can that emotion inform my behavior or my beliefs going forward? So that's why when you don't sleep, it's 4 hours, 3 hours. That's why the next day emotionally we're trashed. Like I said, we're much more emotionally reactive. And over long term, we start to see an increase in depressive symptoms because we're not processing our ability to regulate your emotions. Now, also, one of the things that happens with lack of sleep is the amygdala, that area, it's kind of a switch in your brain that says, wait, things are bad. And it fires up that fear response, fight or flight. It becomes more reactive. Your brain starts to rely on the amygdala more when you're sleep deprived. When you're getting plenty of sleep, you can use your higher centers of your brain. Less sleep, you're using the lower centers of your brain. Again, if you're someone who leads people, whether it's children or it's your community or it's your organization, it's going to be more important there to focus on that. So you can see that hormonally it's important. It's important from a health standpoint, that cleansing impact, but also it's going to be important cognitively and emotionally in order to do it. So now we know how it works. We know what the problems are. We know what happens. Now, what can we do about it? First, I want to talk about what are the common barriers to sleep that we found, but also what are some things you can do to supercharge your sleep? So take the barriers and remove them, and take the superchargers and put them into your life. So the first barrier, I'm talking to the snorers out there. Sleep apnea. It used to be something that we just laughed about when we were kids. Go over to Grandpa and Grandma's house. Grandpa would snore till the windows shook. Ha ha, it was hilarious until we started to see that Grandpa had just about every health complication. Diabetes, heart attack, dementia, started to develop those at a really young age. And they've realized it with sleep apnea. So sleep obstruction, sleep apnea is you have irregular breathing during your sleep. You stop breathing at multiple times, or you're not getting enough oxygen to your brain because your tongue is essentially blocking. As your head goes back, your tongue is blocking your airway. And they see increases in sleep apnea when someone is overweight, or particularly for men who have just a thick neck. So if you're someone who snores, talk to your physician. I can't believe how many people just casually talk about, yeah, I'm a huge snorer. My wife won't even sleep in the room with me, or my husband won't even sleep in the room with me. And it's a ha-ha still. It's important. If you're hearing this right now, share this information with someone. The percentage of people that have undiagnosed sleep apnea in the United States, the physicians, and I've read different numbers on this because it depends on where you go, but they suggest about 40% of sleep apnea in the United States is undiagnosed. That means people are just going with it, and it can significantly increase all those bad things that I listed before. It can significantly increase the likelihood that you're going to fall into that category. Because even if you're in bed for 8 hours, there's a high likelihood that you only had 3 or 4 hours of quality sleep. And that's why you might be getting 7 or 8 hours a night of sleep and you're waking up feeling like crap. By the way, regardless of your age, you should not wake up feeling like crap in the morning. If you wake up feeling like crap in the morning, then something is going on. It's worth it to talk to your daughter or your doctor. Maybe you have sleep apnea or something else is going on. So with sleep apnea, talk to your doctor, get a sleep test. They have so many solutions now for sleep apnea. It does not need to be something that impairs your life. My dad is lifelong snorer. And like I mentioned, he developed early onset Alzheimer's, lifelong snorer, but later in life, he did get the CPAP machine. It changed his life. He immediately lost 20 pounds. His amount of energy, his attitude, his outlook on life completely changed just from that. He had been suffering from sleep apnea for 40 years, didn't address it, didn't do anything, and the CPAP changed his life. So get out there, get that checked. That's an obstruction. That's an obstacle that we can remove. Now, next, habits. One of the more important habits if you want to get quality sleep. So obviously the quantity of sleep, you want to make sure you schedule enough time so theoretically you can get sleep. But that quality of sleep is going to come from going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time every morning, as close as you can get to that. And here's why. Your brain doesn't like surprises. It really doesn't, because it's got to react and it doesn't necessarily know how to react. So it uses a very inefficient process to react. So what it does, what your brain likes is regularity. So if I go to bed at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock every night, my brain knows, okay, you've been awake for X hours. It's about time to start giving you the sleep hormones. It's about time for me to bring in the nighttime janitor crew. It's about time to start shutting this operation down. That's what your brain does when you go to bed roughly the same time every night. Now, in the morning, when you wake up in the morning, your brain's got to say, oh man, I got to release some stress hormones so I can increase your heart rate, give you a little bit of adrenaline, get your eyes open, get you from kind of being fake dead to being ready to solve problems and drive cars and do all the things that we have to do. So it likes to know, hey, at about 6 in the morning is when I start releasing this stuff. You get up and you go. Now, if one night you're in bed at 10 and then the next night it's 1 in the morning and then you're so tired it's 9, your brain has no idea. So you lay there and you've laid there for a while and your brain's like, oh, wait, are you going to sleep? I guess it's dark outside, so I guess you're going to sleep. Okay, let me see if I can talk to the melatonin in the hormone department and get you some hormones to help you do that. So going to bed and waking up, if you don't do that right now, that is going to dramatically increase the quality of your sleep. You're going to go to sleep faster. You're going to stay asleep longer if you start to normalize that. Next, stimulation. This is another barrier, is stimulation before going to bed. This could be watching a TV program that gets you fired up. This could be staring at your phone with blue light, which is our eyes recognize as sunlight, are telling you that you're staring at the sun. It could be that you're looking at social media and you're getting fired up because you're jealous or angry or you're getting politically involved or one of those things that social media does to us. Avoid stimulation before bedtime. One of the more powerful things that I started, that one of these obstacles I removed was when I didn't let my cell phone go to bed with me. Bed should be for 2 things that start with S. That's what your bed should be, and I'll let you figure that out. But your bed should be just used for 2 things. They both start with S. If you're in bed and you're trying to read emails or whatever that is, think about the message you're sending to your brain. You're saying, hey, brain, I really need to bring it down now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stare at the sun and find out what's wrong in my life. Not a good idea. Try to keep those out of your room. Check your emails before you go to bed. Have a planned amount of time to where, if I find something I need to get back to someone, then I got 30 minutes before I go to bed. I've found that I need to shut everything down by about 7 o'clock. If I stay up and write and do emails after 7 o'clock, it adds hours to when I'm able to fall asleep. So really avoiding stimulation before you go to bed. Another obstacle is if your bedroom is too light, if your bedroom is warm, if there's a lot of ambient noise, and we can't always control those, I understand, but those are things that are going to help create a better environment if we can remove those obstacles. And finally, eating too close to bedtime. This was something that I hadn't figured out for such a long time. In my 30s, I was getting home late at night after 8 o'clock. I'd eat a very big meal and I'd go to bed, and theoretically I'd be asleep for 7-ish hours. But I would wake up feeling like death. I was 30 something years old and I swore I was like 80 years old when I woke up in the morning. What happens when you eat? You get this big growth hormone release because insulin increases and growth hormone, and eating is like a drug. It impacts our hormones and all that. And so all of a sudden we're trying to go to sleep. And not only does my digestion have to still work, all these hormones are going, and I can't go into my super deep sleep, and it's impacting how I'm able to even go through all my sleep cycles. So I'm not able to go through those sleep cycles 3 to 5 times a night with this big amount of food in my stomach. So really try to space that time between when you eat and when you go to bed by a dead minimum of 2 hours. Absolute dead minimum of 2 hours. A little bit longer is better. Eat light at night if you can for a variety of reasons. Now, a lot of drugs are going to get in the way of that, whether they're prescription drugs. Make sure you understand the impact if you're on prescription drugs. Make sure to have that conversation with your physician so that you understand how they might impact sleep. Because again, sleep is extremely impactful to your health. So the first one, let's talk about alcohol. The statistics on this, from the people in the United States that drink alcohol, 70% of those people drink alcohol to help them with sleep. It helps them wind down at the end of the day. They claim it helps them sleep. So they've done a lot of research on that. So, well, does alcohol actually help us sleep? And alcohol does make us fall asleep faster, but there's more to the story. Alcohol acts as a narcotic, so we don't actually go through our regular sleep cycles. It kind of goes in and just knocks us out. Well, when the alcohol, the narcotic effect wears off, then our brain's like, well, why did I just fall asleep? I don't recall going through my phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 and all that. So we kind of got to start over. So even if you've probably experienced this before, you have a beer or like one drink or a glass of wine pretty close to bed, and you wake up in the morning and you're kind of like, man, I just can't handle my alcohol anymore. What's happened? I'm getting old. It's just that narcotic kind of helped you fall asleep, but when it wore off, it didn't really help. It actually made things worse, and it pushed sleep down the road. Now, if you drink a lot before bedtime, what happens is that REM, remember I talked about the rapid eye movement sleep that's so important? It happens later at night. Well, it's called REM suppression, and what it does is it pushes that REM sleep to even later in the night / earlier in the morning. So you don't really get much of it, and you have to wake up early in the morning. You might not get much REM sleep at all if you're drinking probably more than one drink a night. So just know that if you're going to have a drink every night, no alcohol is going to be better for your sleep, but really try to space that from bedtime by a dead minimum of 2 hours, preferably more than 4, and you're not going to have that impact on your sleep. Next, cannabis, weed, marijuana. It's legal in most states now. It is, especially older populations are using it like candy to fall asleep. Because it has been shown to help people fall asleep quicker. And they're still doing a lot of research on this. What they have found, though, is particularly in higher doses, which is different for everybody, how their body reacts to it, it does cause that REM suppression as well. In other words, it pushes that REM sleep to later in the night, earlier in the morning. If you got to get up early in the morning, that's really going to impact how you feel when you wake up because you didn't get adequate REM sleep. Caffeine. So the way caffeine works, caffeine in itself is an energy. What caffeine does is it binds to our brain. It preferentially binds to these receptors in our brain that are originally designed for adenosine. Now, Adenosine starts to be released shortly after we wake up in the morning, and it builds up in your brain over the day, over the course of you doing stuff, and it causes fatigue. That's why they theorize that even if we're in an all dark environment, they've actually had people in caves to see this, we will develop natural sleep cycles that mirror a normal sleep cycle. And they think that this has to do with adenosine. Well, what caffeine does is caffeine binds to those receptors designed for adenosine, and it doesn't allow that fatigue to happen. Now, adenosine continues to build up. It just can't bind. The half-life of caffeine is about 5 hours. So after about 5 hours after that Red Bull or that coffee or the energy drink, whatever it is, you got about half the concentration in your blood. Well, if you drink a 200, which is that's a small Starbucks, it's a small commercial coffee, is about 200 milligrams. 5 hours later, you got 100 milligrams of caffeine still in your system, blocking adenosine and not letting you get sleepy. And then 5 hours later, you got about 50. So it just keeps decreasing like that throughout the day. So when we're drinking caffeine after noon, this is something that's going to really be, even if you're like, oh no, I can drink caffeine and go to sleep. Even if you say you can drink caffeine and go to sleep, it's a high likelihood that caffeine is preventing you from going into deep sleep or REM sleep. And it's even impairing your non-REM deep sleep. So caffeine, keep it before noon. The earlier in the day you can have caffeine, and keep your daily intake of caffeine below about 300 milligrams. Next thing, nicotine is a stimulant. Now they've got smoke-free nicotine. They got into the little lip pillows and things like that. Nicotine is a stimulant. Nicotine is going to interfere with your ability to get to sleep. Separate nicotine at least 2 hours before bed, preferably more. Nicotine clears the system a little bit faster than caffeine, but separating that from bedtime is going to be really important. Now, antihistamines are something that people use for sleep. So the drugs that are obstacles, you say, well, Brett, I take a Benadryl. I know people that's just their sleep routine. They take a Benadryl or a Unisom. These are antihistamines. They prevent your body's histamic response to stimulate. One of the things it does is when that happens, you get sleepy. The problem is it interferes with the natural sleep cycles. It's not in line with natural sleep. Most people, after doing that for a long time, they think they're doing fine. But if you're going to be tested in the lab, you would see you're waking up groggy. They're also finding, particularly with antihistamines like Benadryl, long-term use appears to contribute to increased likelihood of developing dementia. And again, you don't go through those natural sleep cycles. You're probably not going through that cleansing of the brain, lymph, and all those other things. So again, really important to see that. So what can you do? What's going to help you sleep? So now we know the obstacles. Okay, it's been a lot of bad news, but here's the good news. If you change your habits, you can dramatically increase your quantity and quality of sleep. The first thing from a health habit standpoint, exercise during the daytime. Exercising at night gets your body amped up. They found, though, after time, you can get used to it and go to sleep and actually get decent sleep. But if you exercise during the daytime, a couple cool things happen. For one, evolutionarily, we're perpetual motion machines. We're designed to move. We're designed to be really active during the day and make ourselves tired and fall asleep at night. If we're sitting at a desk all day, we're not really tiring ourselves physically. So when you exercise during the day, it helps us physically fatigue so we can fall asleep. That seems obvious, but something cool that they found. If you want to increase the quality of your sleep, when you exercise, you increase your core temperature. Kind of duh, right? You're running around, you're sweating, all that. You increase your core temperature. Well, in order to get quality sleep and fall asleep, your core temperature decreases. So you're like, well, Brett, why would exercise increase my core temperature, but at night I want it to decrease? When you increase something physiologically outside of the normal parameters, exercise really increases that. When it comes down, it's going to come down slightly below normal parameters. It's just kind of the oscillation of how our physiology works. So I'll actually see a slightly lower core temp, which actually allows me to get a deeper level of high quality sleep. So again, another feather in exercise's hat. It's going to help us sleep better. Something else, and this is just what I say, it's sleep routine. Be 6 years old after 9 o'clock at night. Be 6 after 9. My daughter, her whole life, she's 12 now. But man, when she was little, and all of you that have kids out there, you remember being a kid, what did bedtime mean? Bedtime meant that, all right, we got to turn off the TV, quit running around, calm down, put on your pajamas, take a bath. We're going to sit down. We're going to talk differently. We're going to turn the lights down. We're going to do this. Everything goes from up here to here. And all right, now we're going to turn the lights down. We're going to read a story and cuddle, and I'm going to rub your back. And then eventually, okay, turn out the light. Good night. And as a kid, how many mornings did you have where you're out at the playground and you're complaining because it's Monday and you're exhausted? We didn't do that. Some point in our lives, we got to a point where mom and dad weren't creating the sleep routine, so we just went all Motley Crue. We went nuts like rock stars. Like, I'll just go till I fall down. Again, without a routine, your body and brain don't really know what's going on. So once you have a sleep routine, and I do not recommend, I hear all this stuff, well, I sit under this light for this amount of time and do this, and I put on this special clothes, and I put on this special. Man, sleep anxiety for people trying to be perfect with their sleep routine is causing more sleep disruption than just about anything else. So your routine, make it simple. Maybe it's at 8 o'clock at night, phone goes down, TV turns off at a certain time. You put on your bedtime clothes at a certain time. Maybe you take a shower, you listen to relaxing music. What is your routine? Because that routine, every step of that routine says, hey, it's time to shut it down. If there is no routine, your brain's constantly like, dude, I don't know what you want me to do. I'll try my best. So finding that, be 6 years old after 9 o'clock. Think about what that means. What would you do with a 6-year-old? And if you're not doing that, it's about time to be 6 after 9. Next, journal. Now, you might be like, Brett, come on, that's this new agey. When things stay in your head, if you've woken up at 2 a.m. and something's ruminating in your head, here's something about all of our heads. Our brains are hell-bent on survival. Our brains are not there to say, oh, no, everything's perfect. Our brains are there to say, did you turn on the burner? Did you turn it off? Because if you didn't turn off the burner, then the whole house is going to burn down. When the whole house burns down, this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen. Pretty soon you're going to be homeless, and that's the way our brain works because it's trying to figure out worst case scenarios that we might have to solve. That becomes a problem at 2 a.m. when we're trying to ruminate on something that happened at work or during the day. But here's what's cool. And they've actually found this through research, the impact of writing, particularly when it's pen to paper, because of the areas of the brain required for that fine motor coordination. They've actually found that helps us. When we write something down, it helps it get out of the panic area of our brain and into the higher centers of our brain where we actually can make decisions and be rational. So if you're someone who wakes up at 2 a.m, having a journal by your bed, writing down the sentences, write down exactly what is bothering you, what's keeping you up, and then write down 2 to 3 steps that you can do the next day or 2 to 3 solutions. Anecdotally, a lot of the clients I've worked with, they've found a lot of relief from doing that. I've worked with a lot of attorneys, and they're rolling over their cases in their head, especially litigation attorneys. And that's one of their tricks. They keep something by the bed, they get up, write it down. The brain says, okay, you got it out, you got it solved. Now we can go back to bed. So there's a lot of questions. So those things, those basic things are going to help increase the quality of sleep. But I know you're sitting there and saying, well, Brett, what about these magic supplements? And so really when it comes to research behind supplements, and they talk about a lot of things. They talk about valerian tea, and they talk about theanine, and there's all kinds of things they talk about. When it comes to research, though, the 2 most promising supplements, probably not going to surprise many people, but there's some little intricacies that's important to know. First of all, melatonin. Now, your body makes melatonin. Melatonin's release says, hey, time to shut it down. When your eyes, gets dark, we start to shut it down. Melatonin hormone's released. Some people don't make enough of it. Most young people, the wide majority of young people do make plenty of melatonin. So most of melatonin's impact is placebo. It's psychological. However, most people think the more melatonin you take, the better. They found after you're taking 0.3 milligrams of melatonin, if you're taking more than that, you're just making yourself groggy the next day because your brain and body can't even really react to that. So if you're young, melatonin probably is not going to do much to you, but if it's something that helps you fall asleep, the recommendation is to save that for times of severe insomnia or if you're jet lagged. If you start to use it every night, it starts to become dependent, and then it's truly not really helping you. But it is something that can help people in certain situations. One of the more promising, and I've seen my clients, I've had a lot of this, magnesium glycinate. Now, magnesium is something that really helps the role of the regulation of your nervous system. They found with magnesium glycinate, it really helps with relaxation, calming the nerves, regulating your nervous system before bed. Again, magnesium can interact with heart medications, some things like that. Talk to your doctor. But if you're struggling, those are the two things that have the most peer review, meta-analysis, research behind them. After that, good luck. They're going to find some things coming up. I'm sure they're researching so many things. But if you find something that works, talk to your physician and stick with it if they say that's a good idea. So now, hopefully, depending on what archetype you fit into, whether you're someone who thinks sleep is for the weak, whether you're someone who's like, I'd like to sleep, but I'm kind of weak, I'd like to do other things, or you're like, Brett, I want to sleep, I just can't. Hopefully that gives you some actionable, one, knowledge, but also tools that you can put into place right away. Just be 6 years old after 9 o'clock. It's worth it to take care of your health and get sleep. So thanks for tuning in today. Make sure you like this episode. Make sure you follow me. And if this is something that maybe you have one of those archetypes in your life, you know someone, share this with someone that could help change their life. So I look forward to seeing you next time. We're going to continue this series on how your brain and body, the things that you can do with your brain and body that can help you feel and perform better on a daily basis so you can live, labor, and love with a greater sense of purpose. This is Brett Klika, and I hope to see you soon.